All right, thank you. Okay, so thanks everybody for coming. I know it's well, for some of us it's late in the day, for some of us it's early. But either way, I super exciting to see everybody that's interested in kind of getting a start in the community or learning some things about the community. And I'm really optimistic that so many people are kind of looking to get started in Solr. So my name is Jason. I've been a Solr committer for 7 or 8 years, and I'm really interested in getting other people kind of the opportunity to grow in the community. And it's been an awesome experience for me personally. So I'd just love to see other people be able to do that. Also with me is Eric, who's kind of helped organize and set things up and is helping with some of the logistics, and he might chime in for a few of the sections we'll cover today as well. Cool, ready to get started. So I have an agenda that I'd like to talk about. This is kind of intended as an introduction to contributing to Solr. So everything from the community and how it works and where discussions take place and where the different pieces of the code live. Hey, there's somebody new. All the way through kind of things you might need to know as you're creating your first PR or starting to edit the code or the documentation or those sorts of things. So I have an agenda and I'm going to keep marching through it, but I just wanted to say that I think if anybody has questions, it's always good to get those out there, because I've kind of found that any question that people have, it's often not just one person with that question. It's a lot of people that are thinking the same thing. So the way that this will be most useful for you guys is if you just let me know what you want to hear and hear more about, or questions you have. So feel free to stop me at any point and we can kind of go down a rabbit hole on whatever you guys want to talk about. Sound good? All right, let's get started. So I'm sure everybody knows Solr is an open source project that's hosted by what's called the Apache Software Foundation. Now the ASF is a nonprofit. It's a volunteer-run organization, and it has this long track record of kind of shepherding these successful, high-impact open source projects. Spark, Hadoop, Lucene, Airflow. Way back in the day, there's the old HTTP server. And the ASF manages this both by providing some physical infrastructure like build machines and website hosting and that kind of stuff, but primarily through kind of providing the scaffold and dictation of how the project should be run in terms of governance and communication and decision making and those sorts of things. And the main kind of emphasis that the Apache Software Foundation has is in community. And you hear this phrase, community over code. And the idea is that ASF projects, to be successful in the long run, the best thing to do is to play kind of this long game, where at any single point when you're making a decision, you shouldn't focus so much on what's the best thing for the code right now, is you should focus on what's the best thing for the community. Because if you optimize for community, then more people will be around, more contributions will come in, and that kind of rising tide is going to raise all boats in terms of different parts of the code base and different parts of the product in general. So that's great on paper, but in practice, this kind of comes down to us in a couple of different ways. And the biggest thing, I think, is that it implies very specific things about how communication occurs in an Apache project and in Solr, which is kind of our reason for being here. Because if you're kind of optimizing for community, if you want to be inclusive and open and kind of neutral in all these ways, then that really dictates how community interactions have to happen. And the primary way that they have to happen is on mailing lists. This is where you can imagine like confetti falling and air horns going off. Not really. Mailing lists are kind of boring. They're not like sexy or fun technology. They're not even really user-friendly. But they are available to everyone, everywhere in the world. They're operating system independent. They're machine independent. And they work. So when you look at kind of where do these community interactions happen, mailing lists are a big piece of that, which is jarring because they're kind of like out of the 80s or whatever, but they get the job done. So the Solr project, if you're interested in being a new contributor, has 3 mailing lists that are probably going to be most important for you. There's the dev list, the user list, and the issues list. And kind of at a glance, these mailing lists handle the things you would guess from the name. The dev list is used a lot to talk about like the internals of the Solr code. If you were making some edits in Solr and there's something you don't understand, you might ask a question on the dev list. Or if you're working with other developers and you want to kind of coordinate your effort schedule-wise and stuff, the dev list is where that happens. Releases get planned on the dev list, that sort of stuff. The users list is more for the other side of things, for people who are actually using Solr. Somebody that's deploying Solr might want to know, how do people typically deploy Solr for e-commerce use cases? That's a question you might send to the users list. Or I'm getting this stack trace. Has anybody seen this before? Those are all kind of things that are user list bread and butter material. The last list is really kind of a read-only aggregation of all of the discussions that happen in Jira and GitHub and all these other places. And that's the issues list. So one thing to note about the mailing lists is because we're trying to be so inclusive for time zones and for different contributor styles, there's volunteers, there's people who are paid to work on the projects. The communication on the mailing list is great, but it tends to be slower. It's pretty reasonable if you send a message on Solr's dev list, you might get a response right away, but it's reasonable to wait 3-4 days or even a week before you hear back. And that's fine. That's kind of by design. It's not great, but it's intentional in a sense. But there are places you can go to have quicker turnaround time and hopefully quicker feedback. The first is a Slack server run by the ASF. And there's a link to it there. And there's a Solr dev channel. So this is kind of primarily for dev development. The second is a different Slack server, really called Solr Slack, a bit redundantly. And this is actually a kind of a mirror of an IRC channel, if anybody still uses IRC. It was originally set up as IRC because people use that, and as soon as Slack came out, almost everybody uses Slack now. But there's a channel for user questions that's #Solr, and there's a channel specifically for Solr development, which is #Solr dev. So we have the mailing lists. We have kind of these hopefully quicker feedback kind of chat rooms, Slack servers. And we also have our issue trackers. And this is kind of where discussion happens that's specific to a particular issue or on a PR. So these are all kind of the places that you would go to get that you might have a particular discussion. Does anybody have any questions about maybe what sort of things go to which place? Or anything else so far? Great, cool. So I put slides in here to do this little exercise synchronously, but I ran over when I did this session in the morning. So I think I'll try to speed through this. And if anybody's interested, we can go through it more slowly at the end. But this is all to say that if you're interested in contributing to Solr, the development mailing list in particular is going to be a great resource for you as you get used to the code, as you ask questions about how something works or why it works that way. So I think it's something that everybody should really sign up for. And the process for that sign up is, it's not hard, but it's also not the most user-friendly. So I wanted to walk people through it. Essentially what you do is you send an email address, or you send an email to the address dev-subscribe@apache.solr.com in the green box you see on your slide. The body of the email down here in red doesn't have to be anything in particular. The blue subject line just has to contain the word subscribe. And this is how you sign up. So you'll send this off, and then sometime later, it's not always very quick, but you'll get a confirmation email. And this email is going to contain an email address that you have to reply to. And as this email kind of makes clear, if in most email clients, if you hit the reply button, it will go to the right place, but that's not always the case. So what I would always recommend people you do is when you get this confirmation kind of reply back, just you can hit the reply button in your email client, but also copy and paste this email address into the recipient box, just to make sure that this goes through and gets to the right place. If you do that, then you should be all subscribed and ready to go. You should start getting mail for the dev list. Excuse me. Okay, so let's say we all ran that at the same time. We're all subscribed to the dev mailing list now. We all have some particular change that's been bugging us, something we want to try out in the Solr code. But obviously the first thing you need to do is actually figure out where the code lives, which if you're new to Solr, you might not know. And even if you were used to Solr several years ago, this used to be a pretty simple question, but the code has branched out in some interesting ways in the last few years. And it can be kind of tricky to keep track of where everything is if you're not in all these repos regularly. So it turns out that there are 4 GitHub repositories where the code lives. This top one here, this top bullet point, is really where almost all of the stuff that people think about is being Solr lives. It's where the Solr server code lives, the SolrJ client, the ref guide documentation. That all lives there. But there's also a few other pieces that the Solr community maintains. Our website is open source and kind of open for contributions. That's at a separate GitHub repo. The Solr community maintains a Kubernetes operator, which does some really cool stuff in terms of letting people deploy Solr on Kubernetes. So there's a GitHub repository for that. And there's also a sandbox where we have either components that are maybe experimental and not quite ready for prime time, or even that are very high quality, ready for anybody to use, but just kind of run on a different release schedule. So they end up in the sandbox instead of the main repository. So there's several different repositories, and it's interesting to know that the website and the kind of the main Solr repo, for lack of a better term, use Jira for their issue management. But these newer repositories down at the bottom have kind of switched over to GitHub. So that might give you a sense of where the project is heading in terms of issues. We might move to GitHub at some point in the future. There's been some discussion there. But right now, this is where everything lives. So if you want to go grab the Solr code, you can download it and get all set. Before you go out and download everything now, I just think it's a point that gets made from time to time, but bears repeating. There are a lot of ways to be involved in an open source project. Everybody kind of gravitates, I think, to writing code, or they imagine that in their mind as being the most valuable thing. But there's really not kind of a hierarchy of different things you can do. I think most people in the community truly believe that debugging CI failures or voting on releases or answering user questions is just as important as writing the code, which is great if you don't have the time to write code or if you don't have the inclination to do it. So it's just something that I always try to stress and that people should keep in mind is that if you know anybody who's interested in being involved in open source, but isn't kind of the traditional developer, there's definitely a place for them to get involved. There's definitely stuff that they can do. And we would love to have them. Okay, so we have signed up for the dev mailing list so that we can ask questions when we get stuck. We have found out where all the code lives and all the issue trackers so that we can file issues and work on things. What should the process look like for our first PR? So that there's a couple ways that I'll break this down. We'll talk about kind of interacting with the issue tracker. We'll talk about the actual development and some commands and helpful things to know in terms of working with the Solr code locally. We'll talk about kind of some of the quality check and sanity checking that we do on PRs before merging them, and that will make it easier for reviewers to pick up your code. Then we'll talk about some of the Git related stuff in terms of publishing and getting things up in GitHub and getting that working. And lastly, we'll talk about kind of some speed bumps that might come up in the review process itself. So we'll kind of jump into those one at a time here. Before I get into that specifically, does anybody have any questions? Okay, cool.
That's to me.
All right, I'll keep plugging. Okay, so the first thing we come to here is kind of the first logical thing in the process, and that's either filing an issue that you want to work on, or kind of picking up something that already exists out there and running with it. I think this is old advice, but I think it's very useful when you're getting started in open source. But when you're working in an issue tracker, it's especially important in open source to be as detailed and as concrete as possible. If you're working on a bug or reporting a bug, include a script to reproduce the bug. Mention the environment that you saw it in, or the version of Solr that it's in. You don't have to test all versions, but if you know it's in one, other people can kind of fill in what they know too. If it's an improvement, like a new feature that you're trying to add, you might want to mock up like how the behavior changed before and after. Say you're changing an API response, you can include kind of the JSON, say this is what it looks like before, this is what it looks like later on. And this is true whether you're filing the issue or if you come to an issue and you just think it needs some more detail. I think it's something that established people in the product take for granted, I think, but it's incredibly valuable to get that extra detail, both so that if you take a break and come back to the issue, you have a good way to kind of pick up the stuff and regain that context. But also for a reviewer who might not be as enmeshed in the details, they have one place that they can go and really feel empowered to review your code, which is kind of what you want in the long run. Let's see. Okay, so the next thing to keep in mind is your filing issues. Is that if you're not a committer to the project, which you're probably not if you're just getting started, there's not a way in Jira to assign the ticket to you. Just the way that the ASF Jira server is set up, the tickets can only be assigned to committers. But it's still good etiquette to kind of declare your intention to start working on it. So the best way to do that is just to write a comment at the bottom and say, hey, thinking about picking this up. And then if you drop it again, or you go on vacation, or you don't have time anymore, you just kind of leave a comment there and say, here's where I got, here's what I ran into, but anybody else should be free to pick this up. And that's just it's not ideal, but it works well enough in practice for kind of organizing our work and making sure that people don't duplicate effort. All right. Okay. So let's say you have found a ticket that you want to work on, and you've said, hey, this is my thing, I'm going to start on it. Where do you actually go in the code? How do you kind of get started there, and what does that workflow actually look like? So I'm hoping, can everybody see my terminal okay? Is that readable?
Yeah, I can read it.
Okay, awesome.
Yep.
Try the latest stuff. I don't like that. I'm not going to do that. Okay. So the first thing I wanted to show is that when you look at the main Solr code, one of the first things you'll notice is that it's a Gradle-based project. The Gradle build is something that people have put a lot of work into, and it just turned out really well. It's a huge improvement over what we had previously. And one of the ways that it shines is in the help text that's offered. So you can type /gradlu, or you can just run whatever Gradle you have installed locally, and then help. And this will take a second to run, but what this will do is it'll print out kind of a submenu of different tasks that you can zoom into in terms of getting more help. You can print out help specific to workflow. There's help topics, specifically if you're familiar with our old build system called Ant. There's help text if you want to add dependencies to the project, or if you're new to Git, or if you're having trouble importing into your IDE. There's just tons of help text here that's super useful for folks. Especially when you're getting started, I'd recommend looking at this help workflow section, which will tell you how to run tests. It'll tell you how to just compile. All kind of these basic development tasks are going to be in this help workflow command. Also good to look at is there's a README here that is kind of what gets displayed in GitHub when you navigate to the project. But there's some basic commands about getting started and how to get started contributing and licensing and all those README-ish things. But there are other development documents as well in this folder called DevDocs. So there's some process description. There's some, let's see, this overseer is kind of a technical design document describing how a particular feature works. Same with shard split. There's all sorts of things here. And in this ref guide directory, there's help for editing the Solr documentation. So this DevDocs folder, it's still growing. It's kind of a recent addition to the project to accumulate all this developer documentation in one place. But even kind of early on in its infancy as it is, it's super useful for new developers, I'd say. Okay, so those are the places that you'd probably go for help right away. That's the DevDocs directory, that's the README, and that's any of the help text in Gradle. So let's pick kind of a concrete use case here. Let's say we want to edit some documentation. Let's see. Okay. So in kind of this root directory, we have all kinds of files, and a lot of these are, let's say, project setup kind of files. There's your build system stuff. There's dependency versions. Really, the heart of the project is in this Solr directory. So we go in here and we'll see lots of different modules. The core module is really kind of where most of Solr's server-side code lives. A lot of these other modules kind of feed into there as well. There's the Solr J module, which is our Java client code that you can use kind of to talk to Solr from your application. But the documentation lives in a module called Solr Ref Guide. Oops. Okay, so if you look around in here, can I tree this? Let's see if that makes sense. You can kind of get a sense of what this is. There's a README in the root directory, and you can see that this is an ASCII doc file. That's what that ADOC extension is. And ASCII doc, are people familiar with the ASCII doc format? Okay, it's essentially an extension of Markdown. So the same kind of Markdown syntax that you use if you're up in GitHub and you're putting in bolding or italics. It's a really common format that's kind of come up in the last couple of years. But ASCII doc is kind of an extension of that. And actually, let's see.
It is really powerful. I find it like sometimes I'll write my content in whatever I'm comfortable with, get it looking good, and then go put it in ASCII doc because it has all the other features. I find editing an ASCII doc to start with that I'm like spend all my time formatting instead of actually getting the words on paper.
Yeah, I'm curious, Eric, do you use any of the IDE plugins that give you like live preview?
No, and that might also be my problem.
Okay, I would super recommend those. So the ASCII doc syntax, it is powerful, but there are a lot of things that if you don't use them often, it's tough to remember. And so one thing that can help you with those, let's see. Is this cheat sheet. It's an ASCII doc cheat sheet that's in the DevDocs directory in the ref guide folder. So if you can't remember how to add links or make something bold or italicized, let's see, code formatting, in terms of like syntax examples and stuff, all sorts of stuff. This is a great cheat sheet. If Google isn't giving you what you want, or you don't have internet at all, there is a cheat sheet kind of in the repo to look at the ASCII doc syntax. The other thing that really
is that ref guide written in ASCII doc?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Can you have just a quick look at it again?
Sure. So this is it's in devdocs/refguide/ASCII-doc-syntax.adoc.
Okay.
Let me just go to like the middle here so you can get a sense.
Okay.
That how it does like the tabs when we show you like V1 and V2 and like the syntax highlighting and.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep, absolutely. So the other thing that's helpful is I was kind of mentioning earlier to Eric is a lot of IDEs. I use Vim a lot when I'm writing the documentation, but if you use IntelliJ or Atom, ATOM, or I'm sure most kind of modern IDEs have support for this now. But there's a feature that I've used in IntelliJ at least that's kind of a live preview. So it'll give you two kind of like split screen panels, and you can edit the ASCII doc in one, and the second is kind of a live preview. Like, did your link syntax work? Is this image getting embedded the way you wanted? Is the text formatted the right way? So it really helps to verify your syntax there in a way that is a little more painful if you don't have something like that. So I definitely recommend looking into that. If you guys have an editor and you're interested in writing docs, definitely look to see if there's a live preview kind of plugin for that. Excuse me just a second. Okay. So that's where kind of the ref guide code lives. That's the format that it exists in. And the build process for this is actually that it gets compiled down to HTML so that it can exist as a web page. So here, you know, the workflow that I usually go through when I am making changes to the docs, 90% of the time, is that I'm reading documentation on something kind of in the publicly published ref guide, and I say, wait a minute, this parameter isn't router.name. It should be camel case. It needs to be router name. So what you can do is you just grab a sentence from this document, and then, you know, I don't know what file it lives in, but we're in the terminal, and we know grep probably, which is how you can search for things in text files. So we can run grep to see what file this is in. The screen sharing thing is blocking off my copying this file. But so we can come in here and we can just edit this. Hopefully tab completes, great. And this is the ASCII doc that produces that HTML that we just looked at. And it's easy enough to find the piece that we care about and change the name of this parameter. And then the command to actually build the documentation is build local site. See if that works. Okay, and so what this will do is it'll take all of those ASCII doc files, it will kind of compile them down to HTML. It also does do some Java compilation, because in our reference guide, we have Java snippets that actually come from unit tests that run. And so that's how we make sure that our Java syntax examples, say for Solr J, are kind of kept up to date with the client code as it changes. So you can see here, it does take a little longer because you have to compile Java and do some of this stuff. But still, it should be done in about a minute, and then we'll see what the output looks like. Does anybody have any questions while this is working through here? Okay, perfect.
Actually, I had a question.
Yeah.
Is there any support for like Mermaid JS for like diagramming, or you just basically have to PNG it and then convert to PNG and then insert it in the doc?
I know there are some places where we just have PNGs kind of committed to the repo because there is a plugin for diagramming. I'm not familiar with whether it's Mermaid or something else.
Okay.
But that is probably something that would be in this Solr ref guide README.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. It would be a nice thing though, because the drawings always immediately fall out of date.
Yeah.
And you can't update.
All right. Yeah, sorry, I couldn't answer that. But I know there is some diagramming support. I'm just not sure what it looks like.
It's all good. I'm just curious.
Yeah, cool. So our build here finished, and basically the main thing to pay attention to in this output is just kind of the root index.html file for our ref guide. So we have all of this HTML on disk. I meant to copy that. And you can just go to your browser and preview to see how it looks. So here we have the whole ref guide and all the navigation works. The page that we were editing is this collection management commands. And the best way to get to that, in my experience, if you know the title of the page, is just to go to this little search bar and wait for the autocomplete to show you what you want. For reasons that are complex and frustrating, the ref guide does not have great search except for just using Google. But if you know the name of a page, it's pretty easy to find. So yeah, we made our ASCII doc change, we compiled, and there it is. It looks just the way we would expect to. So that is kind of the doc workflow. Does everybody feel like they have what they need if they wanted to edit the docs? Awesome. Okay, so that's the docs. Let's take a look at what actually needs to be done to write code. Okay, so we're back in terminal. What directory? Okay, perfect. So the first thing, obviously, that you're going to want to need to do when you edit code is to get it up in your IDE of choice. My IDE of choice is IntelliJ, but this process should look very similar regardless of your editor. Because the build system is Gradle that the Solr project runs with. That's kind of supported natively by Eclipse, by IntelliJ, by a lot of these kind of popular IDEs. So the way you import the project is you would just go to new and then project from existing sources. And then you would point it to the Solr kind of root directory on disk there. I won't do this now just because I already have the project loaded up, but that's really all it takes. So this will import it into your IDE. In terms of editing though, there's still a few things that you can do to make your life a little smoother. The one thing that jumps out at me is that in Solr, in really all Apache projects, each source file has to have a copyright header. That, I mean, you guys are, I'm sure, used to this for anywhere you work typically has these, but the best way, well, I'll say that I continually, when I push up PRs, have problems remembering to put this in my files, and I get continually dinged on reviews for it. But there is a way that you can kind of work around this. In IntelliJ, you can go into your preferences. Oh, I don't know what this is.
I'm sort of curious, like, what do people
okay.
use? Does everybody use IntelliJ? And like, we should only talk about IntelliJ, or does anyone use anything different? So I thought I'd ask.
I'll tell you right now, it's 2 for 2 for IntelliJ. So we've hit our mark here.
3 for 3.
Yeah,
Well,
so you can go.
I mean, you should have had checkboxes because I used more than one.
Yeah.
This is with like 30 seconds of thinking.
Yeah, we're flying by the seat of our pants here. But you're right for sure.
I did debate. I was going to put Vim and Emacs as one option, and then I thought I'd get pitchforks if I did that. So I made them 2 separate ones.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, so for these file templates, what you can do is IntelliJ, Eclipse, whatever, they have a template every time you say, I want a new interface or I want a new class. There's a template that you can customize that this is driven by. And so what you can do is you can edit this template and put your copyright header in here and have this only apply to, say, this particular project. There's also, if you go to copyright, how do I see this? There's kind of a separate copyright support built in that kind of inserts this into your template too. So these are the two places that you can do this in IntelliJ, through the copyright settings or through the file and code template settings. Either way, that'll probably save you a couple rounds of getting fingers wagged at you in review because you missed the copyright header. And it happens to all of us. So there are other things you can do to customize IntelliJ to make your life a little easier in review. I'm not the best person to ask on those because I continually get the finger wagged at me about not following those. Eric, do you have anything else you would recommend to folks?
Not really, oddly enough. No, I
Okay.
don't.
Okay, cool, fair enough. So you've set up your IDE. It's time to go, edit the code, do whatever you want to do, work on your feature. And at the end of that, or even kind of as you're going, you might not be quite at the point where you're writing automated tests, but you might want to know, like, hey, does this work? Does this do what I think it does so far? And the best way that I found for that is a command built into our build system called Gradle Assemble. So I'll kick that off now. What Gradle Assemble is going to do is it's going to take the code, it's going to compile it all, it's going to take all the resources, and it's basically going to build the artifact that you would get if you went to the download page for Solr. It's going to create the zip file or the tarball. You can see here it's making a tarball. And then it'll expand it somewhere on your system. And so you can run this. It's pretty quick if you don't have to recompile a whole ton of stuff. And the output goes to Solr, packaging, build, and then your particular Solr version that you're editing right now. And so you go here and it looks like any Solr install. So here you can start Solr and you can kind of reproduce whatever you're trying to test manually. So this is just a quick workflow for manually testing things. And this is kind of the development workflow that I find myself in a lot. I'll be ready to write some tests, or maybe I'm not yet, but I just want to make sure that it works to know whether the automated test failing or passing is because the test code is bad or because my production code is bad. And I just want to do a manual test just to see. So I'll edit some, and then I will run Gradle Assemble, and then I will start Solr, which is what this does. And then use curl to hit whatever APIs I'm trying to do. If it's kind of a complex test reproduction, then I'll write a script, and you only have to kick off one command in your terminal, and everything goes smoothly. But that Gradle Assemble command is kind of the way that you build a Solr package to test things manually. Anything you want to add there, Eric? I know you mentioned dev earlier.
Yeah, I noticed the assemble is a lot slower than dev. And I think that where I use dev is when I'm doing JavaScript and I'm just changing the source, rerunning dev, reloading the browser, go back to dev. It's not perfect, sure, but it works.
Yeah. So there's a separate command that's akin to assemble called dev, but it does not do as full of a packaging as assemble does. So for some things, like when you're changing JavaScript, it works just great. For other things where you're changing Java code or resource files that get shipped with Solr, like config sets or something, you're probably going to need a full assemble. Just out of laziness, because I can't remember. I usually run assemble all the time, but it is a little bit slower for sure. Okay, awesome. Let's get back to my slides here. I hate the little screen screen share control thing that Zoom has. Anyway, okay. So we know how to edit the documentation. We looked at kind of a development workflow for making changes in Solr and testing them manually. Let's say that we have implemented the function that we wanted to. We're ready to make a PR, but we want to clean things up and make things easier for our reviewers. There's a couple of things you can do. The first is this Solr changes.txt file. Typically, every change in Solr that is visible to users, so that's not just kind of a pure refactor, should get an entry in the Solr changes.txt file. And this is partially as a changelog for users so that they can see maybe what's changed since, if they're upgrading from 8.2 or something like that, they'd want to look at all the differences between 8.2 and in the current version they're jumping to. And it also is used for attribution. Excuse me, I'm sorry. So you can look here, there's different sections, obviously. There's new features, improvements, optimizations, bug fixes. Those are mostly self-explanatory. And then an entry in each of these looks like this. It's kind of a bullet point. It's the number of a JIRA ticket. And then it's just a sentence or two snippet about what changed and why this might matter to a user. And then lastly, let's just see if I can highlight this. Yeah. There's in parens kind of the developer who is responsible for it or who should get credit or who did it in case it doesn't work and you need to like shake the fist at them, And one thing that you also see is if the person who wrote the code, say, and the reviewer are different, sometimes we use a syntax like, here's the person who wrote the code, Josh Uma. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but it was reviewed via Eric Pugh. Good job, Eric. So that's kind of the Solr changes.txt file. A lot of times committers will kind of add this to your PR themselves, but some like you to take a crack at it on your own. And it kind of saves them some work sometimes if you do it for them. So that's one thing you can do to help your reviewer out. Another thing is that before each commit, we kind of reformat the code so that it is somewhat uniform. There's a lot that this misses. There's a lot that it doesn't catch. But you can run this Gradle tidy command, and this will kind of run, I think it's called spotless, and that'll reformat your code. I think it mostly does indenting and a max line break size and stuff.
It's been really great. Like so many debates over formatting and everybody doing it differently. And now it all GW tidy and it's done. I've been really happy with it.
Yeah, it is really nice just to not have to think about it or like worry that you did the wrong format and have to go back and do it yourself. Like change it manually, that is. So this is something that since the code that's committed is GW tidied, this also really helps clean up the diff when you push this up to GitHub. So it makes things easier to review too, in theory. So this is another thing that is a kind of a good sanity check, good cleanup before you commit. And it's going to help your reviewer out. The last two things I wanted to mention here are these Gradle check and Gradle test commands. So check is an umbrella command that runs some static linting, static analysis. It does things like make sure we're not using certain dangerous APIs that are, that there's CVEs associated with, or that we have unused imports. It does a lot of that kind of low-hanging fruit analysis stuff. But then it also runs the tests. So if you want to run analysis and linting and tests, then you can just run Gradle check. What I find in practice is that I have usually made some mistake that check catches the analysis and linting. And I want to know about that quick. So I can just run it a couple times, get that out of the way, and then run tests when I go for coffee or go for a meeting or take lunch or am finished for the day. So I usually separate these out. I will run just the static analysis by running check and then exclude the tests. That's what this X argument does. And then I'll run that a couple times, fix all my mistakes, and then I'll run Gradle test when I'm, you know, about to step away, or I don't care what's happening for the next 30 minutes.
Are these standard tools with Gradle, or it just have been developed by the Solr community?
Some of the commands like test, that's a pretty common idiom in Gradle to run tests. Check, I think, is somewhat standard, but you're not going to find it in all projects. And tidy, I think, is relatively specific to Solr. So kind of a mix. I think for a lot of these standard things that all Gradle projects need to do, the commands are kind of what you would expect, like test and build and compile Java. You know, those things are all pretty standard. When you get into like linting and kind of our pre-commit checks and formatting, there's less convention around those, I guess. So I'm not sure how uniform tidy and check would be. But good question.
So I would imagine the same thing, you know, IntelliJ has tidy. They're not the same thing, right? It's just different things. I probably need to run the, when I try to reformat the code, I'll probably run the Gradle version from the IntelliJ rather than actually trying to run the default code formatting that found in IntelliJ.
Yep. If I take your meaning there, are you saying that the code style that IntelliJ uses might be different from tidy?
Yeah, might be different. Yeah. So
Yeah.
just asking the question, is it different, or probably because you're saying tidy is a Solr thing, so I would imagine there has been some convention from people working with Solr.
Yeah, this is actually a question I was asking a week or so ago. Like, is there an IntelliJ like code style setting? You know, you can export your settings from IntelliJ and import them, so people can share their code styles or whatever. Like, is there one that matches what tidy does? And the answer that I got, I think, was no. So if you have like settings built into IntelliJ that kind of change the formatting, when you run tidy, those are just all going to get overwritten where they deviate, I guess, which is kind of a downer. Yeah, I think you were involved in that discussion a little bit. Does that make sense, Eric? Have I said anything wrong there?
No, I don't think so. Yeah.
Okay, I know you've been working on kind of a code style for IntelliJ. I wasn't sure whether you tried to line it
The
up. with
reason
tidy or how
I
that
was
worked.
working on it was because we had so many code style errors, right? But lately we've been working on them really diligently, and it appears that some of our other tools may work better and not be IDE specific. Like I thought we could easily add it and make it work. So error prone and whatever the Google code and the Eclipse, there's a bunch of tools in there that I think are going to end up doing a better job of flagging things and failing the build versus IntelliJ. Just, you know, I'm actually hopeful that the default out of the box IntelliJ we will be compliant with, not in contrast with or in battle of, right? Where if you fix it in IntelliJ, it'll break in our check process. I think actually our check process, if we get everything done, we'll enforce it in IntelliJ. It'll have very few warnings or alerts.
Yeah.
Like, I can't say enough about how much cleaner the code base is now than it was 9 months ago, or compared to when we added Spotless and the tidy task, which was what, about a year ago?
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Right? Like before then, it was just a wild, like crazy mismatch of everything, right? And then getting the code reformatted, amazing. And then, you know, like we just had a commit of 330 files and probably 1,000 different ways of using the assert statement, including most that were not recommended by IntelliJ. So, yeah. The IntelliJ report used to take like 15 minutes to run because it had so many things it was complaining about. So I'm really excited that in the future it'll run in 30 seconds.
Cool. Okay, sorry, just trying to figure out where I left off. Yeah, so these are all things that are good to do before you push up your PR. Do you need to do them before you push up a PR? No, I think they're nice. I think if you say, hey, I've done this, this, and this, that might encourage people to review. But a lot of times you might have code that's ready except for a test that's failing and you can't figure out why. And if you push up a PR, somebody might be able to catch that for you. So these are great to run before you push up a PR or before you kind of add changes to something out there that's existing. But don't feel like these are hard barriers for getting something up there. Yeah. Okay. So the next thing I wanted to talk about was, so we made our changes locally, we cleaned them up. How do we actually get stuff up there? How do we get a PR in GitHub? One thing I want to check before I get into this though is, what is people's familiarity with Git? Are people pretty okay on making forks and pull requests, or are there people who could use a refresher?
I'm good.
Okay. Perfect. I will just like fly through this real quick then. Let's see. So if there's anyone here, and for the recording too, I will say that there are, I mean, GitHub has them itself, kind of introductions to Git and introductions to the fork and pull request model that are way better than anything I could cover here. But just to give a very quick overview, if you want to work on Solr, if you want to create a fork and create a PR, what you do is you would go to the main Apache Solr repository. You would hit this fork button. And what it would do is it would create a totally fresh copy of your repository that's a clone of the Apache one. This one's under my username, GurlowskiJA. And what you would do then is you would kind of copy the GitHub URL. And then you would go down to the code you cloned, which is a local copy of the Apache repository. And you would add a remote, which is kind of a link between what you have locally, your local changes, and this fork that you just created that lives up on some GitHub server somewhere. So you would say, I want to add a remote. Here's my new kind of, this is just a local handle to refer to your remote fork. And then there's the URL for talking to it. I generally use the SSH URL instead of the HTTPS, but I don't think it really matters. That's just kind of the way that I learned to do it. So you add your remote, you can say git fetch, then the name of your remote, and then I'll pull down all of the branches in your remote fork to your local copy. And since we just made our fork, there's not going to be anything there that differs kind of from the main Apache thing we forked from. So you can run this git fetch command. And when you're editing your changes, you'll do them on a branch. And essentially, when you're ready to push that branch up, you'll say git push the name of your fork, which I call my fork, and then the name of the local branch that you want to publish, and then the name that you want to publish it under remotely. And for me, these are almost always the same value, but you can change it if you made a typo or something in your local branch. Let's see.
Quick question.
Yes.
So you made a fork,
Mhm.
and then you made a remote in your local copy of the main Solr repository, and then you fetched that fork into the same
Mhm.
root folder, and then did you switch? Then you made a branch on that fork locally.
Yes.
And what is the? I don't know if you're going to get to it, but I'm afraid I might have missed it, which is why I'm asking. Why do you pull it down into the same local repo? Is that just to save time, or is that for some reason?
I think it's just a good general practice. Like if you have code locally that is supposed to be in communication with a remote fork up somewhere, you might want to look at other branches that got published there. You might publish branches to your remote fork from some other machine. like say you have a couple of different laptops, a work laptop and a personal laptop. You might push code to your remote fork from your personal laptop on the weekend, and then you want to pull it down on your work laptop during the week so that you can continue adding to it or whatever.
So is the point of creating a fork so that you can create as many sort of branches as you want, or as many, on your own working set?
Yeah, that's part of it. Creating a fork kind of gives you carte blanche to create branches, delete branches. Most people probably don't have permission to create a branch in the main Apache Solr repo.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay.
Just because, it would get all kinds of spam if you just opened that up to everybody.
Yeah. Okay.
And so the whole like GitHub fork and then PR model is partially imposed by GitHub. I don't love the whole idea of creating a fork, but just in terms of working with open source projects where you have to lock down kind of the canonical repo, for lack of a better term, I think having these forks is a good way to do it.
Okay.
Because in my copy of Solr, I can create or delete whatever branches I want, and then GitHub understands how to create a PR from that.
One last question, sorry.
Mhm.
Do you make a new fork for every new piece of work and delete the fork that you had, or do you just have a long running fork that you just continue to update?
No, that's a great question. You create a fork generally once. So the first time you're doing a PR for Solr, you would create your fork, and then you can use that for all of your PRs from then forward.
Okay, thank you for that.
Yeah. Git is a hard thing to explain. There's definitely tutorials out there that would do it way better than I could, but I hope that helps a little bit.
Yeah, that helps. That's fine. Perfect. Thank you.
Cool. Yeah. So this fork here that I created, Gorlowski JA Solr, I probably created this 5 or 6 years ago. And if you look at the branches, you can tell that I was working on a lot of different features. And each one, I push a branch up to this remote. And then when I'm ready to create a pull request, you can come in here and click the new pull request button. Let's see what this looks like. So you'll click that button because you've published your branch, you're ready to make a PR. And GitHub generally does the right thing. The way to read this box here, and this is kind of an important thing to double check, is that GitHub is taking the code that's on Gorlowski JA Solr, that's the name of the repository. So this is my fork, and it's taking this particular branch, and it's trying to create a pull request for Apache Solr, kind of the canonical repo, and the main branch. So that's exactly what you want it to look like. So when you go to create your PR, there's a template here that gets populated, and it'll ask you for a description, and then how you address the problem, your solution, what kind of tests you added. There's a checklist. There's all this stuff, but this is all kind of straightforward. The biggest, hardest things I think are just getting used to the Git commands to run and that kind of stuff. Does anybody else have questions about the GitHub UI, Git commands, anything else? Okay, awesome. Like I said, there's great resources out there that'll teach it much better than I can, but I just wanted to touch on it very briefly. Okay, so you have written your code, you cleaned it up, you got through kind of the Git hurdle, and you got your PR up there. Now, there might be some things that you run into during the review process that are good to be aware of. The first is that just like traffic on the mailing list, that can kind of be slow turnaround. You might push up a PR and it might unfortunately sit there for, a good bit of time. And that can kind of be discouraging because you worked hard on it and all this. And it is kind of a downer. But the one thing that I would encourage people to do is if they worked on code that's not getting looked at, just to be very polite, but be persistent in advocating for getting that reviewed. So you could, if the code has been up there 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month, and nobody has seen it, I think it is totally reasonable, and everybody takes it very well if you would say, hey, Ping, has anybody looked at this? you know, I ran the tests, I ran pre-commit, it all looks good. Oh, excuse me, sorry. I think it'd make a great fix for 9.1. So just be polite, be persistent. Speaking for myself and Eric and other committers I've talked to, we all try our best to review things, but we all have you know, deadlines for work that take our attention away and this and that, and we all feel guilty for not reviewing more. So people want to get to your stuff, they're just having a little trouble with their own backlogs. So if you're polite and persistent, you know, 99% of the time you'll get the attention. It just might take a little longer than you'd hope, which is a downer, but it's the way it is, unfortunately. The last thing that I would encourage people to do is they're kind of going through the review process is just to be explicit as possible, because you're getting review, you're getting feedback from somebody that you may have never worked you've never worked with before. You know, English may not be there or your second language, and you're kind of working in this medium. So just don't be afraid to be kind of explicit as you can, asking for clarification on anything that's confusing. Maybe there's a PR comment and you're unsure, like, is this something they just thought was nice to have, or is this like crucial to them for merging this PR? You know, just ask for clarification. If you don't understand why they're asking you to do something, just ask. And even in terms of, let's say you've gone back and forth for several rounds of review and you've addressed a lot of things and there's been a lot of comments, and then things kind of stall out. You might be in a situation where you're both the reviewer and the author are kind of waiting for somebody else to do something, or, you know, a lot of times it's just really helpful to say, I've addressed all the comments, I think, is there anything else we need to get this merged? Just to kind of reset the discussion and get people looking at it again. I've, in my personal experience, have found that super helpful.
Is there any chance, or it could happen, that you did all the comments and stuff like that, and then the pull request never get merged? I'm just, because I had some experience, not with Solr, with other project, where I invested a bit of time, and then at the end, the final result was not what the person actually wanted to have, or the output was not the one people would thought, but then it never get merged. So that, I wonder whether that's, you know, when you start working on a pull request or a ticket, what if effort you put once it become in a good shape, will it merge or not?
Yeah, I think, man, lots of people join it. I can't tell you that it doesn't happen. I mean, I think that happens in every open source project. But I would say that if that happens, it's on the reviewer to, like, if they're not going to be happy with this, no matter what you do, to make that clear up front, right? I think that's a fault on them. For Solr in particular, I've never seen that on anything I've reviewed. I'm sure it happens occasionally, but I'd say it's rare. What do you think about that, Eric? Or anybody else that's been around the community? I know, Mikhail, you're here. You're on mute, Eric.
Yeah, I think most people appreciate it. And if you ping someone who hasn't been active in a while, they'll just say, like, I haven't been part of the community in a while.
Yeah. And just in terms of, like, getting, I was assuming your question, maybe I misunderstood it, but it was more about, like, irresolvable differences on a PR, or like somebody asked for something and then realized afterwards it's not what they
what I
wanted.
meant is, for example, I'll give you what happened to me.
Sure.
Was a project where there was expectation that if you implement this way of actually do the filtering for this search application, then you will be able to speed up the process, the re-ranking in Lucene ranking. It used Lucene re-ranking to do something, and if you use that features of Lucene, it will speed up the process, and while keep the effectiveness right. What happens is, once I implemented that solution, I tried different versions. It turns out, you know, well, the paper is not really applicable, but was you get my point. So the ticket was already,
it was a performance improvement. It was a theoretical performance improvement that didn't end up bearing results. Is that the idea?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've worked on performance improvements that don't pan out. Where like conceptually you look at something and you're like, oh, this is gonna be awesome. And then it's it just doesn't make it through based on I don't know, the
mean-
results experimentally aren't what you'd hoped for, but
Yeah, and I mean there is a voting process and all of that. I mean, I guess I'd say, one reason to be a committer is it sort of gives your vote a little maybe more weight than if you're not, right? Because you're someone who maybe has been around for a while. I think often what we see in open source too is if there are sort of two ways of doing something and
Yeah.
the community doesn't coalesce around one, and we end up with two ways of doing things. And there's a fair amount of that in Solr. Like
yeah.
you could argue that the entire Solr cloud versus Solr was an irreconcilable difference, right? There were people who wanted Solr cloud and there were people who didn't. And so throughout the code base, there's if Solr cloud mode, then do this, else do this, right? So instead of saying, oh, so.
Yeah, which is good and bad for sure. But
Yeah.
So the short answer to your question is, I mean, there's always PRs that are going to stall out, and it does suck. I totally agree. But yeah, we do try our best.
Yeah, that's all. I'm just asking a question because yeah, I probably would say, well, when I reflect on that one, maybe that was true. Yeah, it wasn't useful, but it was really from the perspective. Forget about that one. But I'm just thinking, there isn't, unless there is a very valid reasons not to generally, right, not to
Yeah.
merge. There isn't like, oh, you done the whole effort, and you just stay there forever.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this reminds me, I was actually thinking about putting in this in the slides, but I was looking through JIRAs that I had worked on in PRs that I'd reviewed and recently, and I found one where this contributor, Thomas, I'm not sure his last name, Thomas, I can't pronounce it, but you know how I mentioned earlier about like every couple of weeks, make sure you ping, and he had done that to me like 4 or 5 times. And for whatever reason, it just never got through my email client. I never saw it, or at least it never kind of bubbled up. And I found this PR the other day, and I just felt awful. And I think that's kind of emblematic about how people feel. We're here because we love Solr and we want to get stuff in. Sometimes stuff falls through the cracks, but we really, I mean, I try my best.
But I mean, maybe your first PR should not be to rip out Zookeeper and replace it with etcd.
Yeah, I know.
As much as we would like that, right? You might want to like, all right, first let's see if we can get Zookeeper behind an interface some more and, kind of work your way. That's one, and then the other thing I'll say is, and this is why, in fact, we did this whole thing is, Jason, and he's going to talk about it more in the next workshop, has a vision for what the API should look like in Solr, and he needs help. Right. And so finding somebody who already is working on something in a direction that you're interested in and tagging on with that is a really good way of getting into the community and becoming a well-known member of the community, right? Is not by ripping out the fundamentals, but by picking up where someone else is, because there's way more work than there is time to do it. So, people would love it. And I mean, Jason was very dubious about us rewriting all the V2 APIs and getting them to a modern RESTful implementation. And I think the only reason he's here and talking to you guys is because I sold him on the idea that we can share that work around to a whole bunch of us and get it done in 3 months.
Wow. I don't think I'm happy to get people started no matter what they work on if they're interested in Solr.
But
I think that's like a side benefit.
Getting that V2 migration done is a lot
Yeah.
easier with 10 people than with just Jason and 220 APIs.
Yeah, for sure. And to one point I wanted to second is when I was getting my start with Solr, I was interested in being involved, but I didn't have anything in particular I wanted to do, which is not everybody's take. A lot of people come in from a company where they have a particular feature they want to implement, and that's fine. But if you are a person who just wants to contribute and doesn't have strong feelings about where, finding an area where a committer is already active is a great way, because you know that they're going to be attentive in reviewing your stuff. You know that they're going to be solicitous about how they can help you. So when I was getting started with Solr, I worked with another committer named Joel Bernstein, and he wrote kind of the streaming expressions there in Solr. And it's how I got my first couple PRs under my belt and really kind of got the hang of the initial workflow. So I can't recommend that enough.
Yeah. I'm good.
All right.
I'm just sorry
Oh,
for
sorry.
asking. Simple, yeah.
So that's kind of all I had. That, you know, I think we had a great discussion on the review side of things there. That was awesome. But those are all my slides. So I just wanted to point you guys at a couple resources at this point. The first is this. There is a label in Jira that's meant to single out tickets that would be ideal for new contributors, and this is called like the new dev label. And these are either ideal because they're simple, or the person who created them like really put a ton of attention and detail into the write-up, so that they're the context is all there and it's easy to get started with. So if you get these slides, I'll make them available at this link here, probably later this evening after I edit a few things up. But you can click this link and it'll take you to a Jira search for all these issues, and you can see if anything kind of piques your interest there. And hopefully that's a great way to get started. Also of interest is Solr has a wiki, which is kind of fallen out of disuse a little bit, but one of the things that's still in there and really helpful is the how to contribute guide, which is a wiki page with some of the stuff in these slides kind of in a text format that might be a little easier to look at. So that might be another resource for you guys. In terms of if you guys are interested in additional workshops, we wanted to kind of extend this bootcamp idea in different directions. As Eric said, there's an area of Solr where there's a lot of new dev tickets that I think are great places for people to get started, and there's people reviewing the tickets too, so it's a good way to make sure you get attention. And that's kind of the V2 APIs. Solr is trying to kind of reinvent its APIs to have a more modern feel and be more intuitive to people and be more compatible with different tooling. And that's an initiative that I and a couple other people have taken on. And we've put a lot of effort into really making it as approachable as possible for new contributors, people who are looking to get started. So we're hoping to have another workshop like this one in a week or two. So we can talk about how the APIs work, kind of what the work is going on there and what that looks like, and maybe even kind of go through an example PR live. So if that interests you, keep an eye out in your email for information about that. We're also hoping to host office hours in case, you know, if you're starting your first PR, but you get stuck or you have questions, or you just want to talk to other people who are in a similar position, you can just come to those and hang out. And we'll probably host those, I don't know, once every couple weeks, once every week, in different time zones, and just be a resource for people to come and chat and get help if they need it. And lastly, we're kind of curious how this workshop will be received and whether it covered what people wanted it to, or if there's gaps that people would like to hear about. So we're open to suggestions as well in terms of things to discuss and to work through. But that's all I had. I guess I'll open up the floor for other questions and anything else people wanted to talk about.